How you going, guys? Nathan Kiley here. Thought I'd try something slightly different with the S&C Q&A. If you've been following me for a while, you might have seen that I'll often jump on Instagram and put up an opportunity for followers to ask questions. That's a good way for me to educate and provide some guidance to the people out there. But what I thought I'd do today is respond in a video format, because I think that gives me an opportunity to provide a little more context and maybe go into a bit more detail. So thanks to all the folks who asked some questions, and let's start answering a few. So the first question here comes from Alex Roberts, and he asks, how do you start building your philosophy as a coach? There's two aspects to your coaching philosophy. The first is your own individual values, and that's probably more to do with you as a person and what you stand for. And then second to that is your coaching philosophy in terms of what sort of methods you value, the way you program, all those aspects of the X's and O's of being an S&C coach. The philosophy as a coach takes time, and to be honest, it's generally going to be influenced by your mentors, the environments that you've worked in, what you've been exposed to. And the reality is I'm very much influenced by a variety of people I've been lucky enough to learn from over time. I think it's really important that you keep an open mind to all sorts of different things that you get presented with, new ideas. And then, as Bruce Lee famously said, it's about discarding what you don't find to be useful and then keeping the things that stand true to you. So over time, because I highly value practicing what I preach, I try a lot of this stuff on myself. And when things feel good, if I can see performance improvements, if I can understand how it feels working through injuries, trying to use these different methods, all of that has formed my experience of training, and my experience of training heavily influences how I think other people's experience of training should look as well. Outside of that, it's also being able to separate your goals from your athlete's goals. So like I said, I like to practice what I preach. I like to train the way I would train an athlete, and it's very important to be careful that you don't get caught up trying to train your athletes the way that you want to train for your individual goals. So for example, if you've got a conditioning focused goal for you, but you're working in a strength power sport, you need to be really careful that you don't get too carried away chasing that. Ultimately, it's a process over time, but most importantly, I think trying that stuff on yourself and trying to train yourself how you would train one of your athletes is probably the best way to get an understanding of the methods and the practice that you want to try and deliver to your players. Next question here comes from Zach Stannard. GPS data for a rugby team, total kilometres per week. So this is an interesting one. Kilometres per week is going to vary based on phase of the year. In pre-season, it's not uncommon to see 20 to 25 kilometres per week total volume. In season, that might drop down to as low as maybe 15, depending on the turnarounds. However, the interesting part of this question is the focus on total distance. For me, total distance is probably one of the least relevant factors when I look at GPS data. It is important from a time on feet perspective, but outside of that, if you're close to what you need to be able to do in season, then your pre-season total kilometres, it's probably not the most important thing to focus on. More important than that are more high intensity related metrics. So high speed running, very high speed running, high intensity accelerations, decelerations, changes of direction. Those are the things that, one, influence performance, and two, from a load monitoring perspective, are the more sensitive measures. So when I talk about performance, I'm talking about things that are going to influence important moments in the game. So we know very high speed running, which in the environments I've worked in, we're looking at above 7 meters per second. That's going to be a stimulus that drives speed adaptations, which are then going to influence our ability to impact the game through speed. Accelerations, so max accels, hard accelerations, again, they're related to aspects that change the game. Outside of that, when we talk about the injury and workload side of things, those high intensity actions are also the riskiest ones. So what we want to try and make sure is that we're exposing our player to the right amount of these high intensity actions so that their body is robust and resilient. I can't give you specific numbers for what's normal because they're so positionally dependent and they're so individually dependent. If I'm working with a new team, I probably just want to sit back and observe what normal practice and competition looks like and collect GPS data on that to investigate what's normally happening. And then I start to create targets around, all right, well, what's my bandwidth for each individual player in terms of each of those metrics, and what's an appropriate and inappropriate amount for them to be doing. Ruben, what do I do for recovery? Supplements, icing, stretching. So from a supplements perspective, I've to be honest, I keep it pretty simple with supplementation. There's probably only 3 supplements that I recommend everyone be taking. Protein, which is obviously very important for recovery. Creatine, which improves our ability to perform high intensity actions. And caffeine as a stimulant for training and performance. Outside of that, I don't really recommend too many other supplements. If we've got a sports dietitian that I'm working with, then I leave that to them to delve a little bit deeper. In terms of icing, stretching, so recovery is a really interesting one, and it all depends on the timeline that you're working in. If you've got, say, more than 72 hours between competition bouts, that's where I probably don't worry too much about these sort of passive and active recovery methods. I'm happy for the body to go through that inflammatory response because it's actually part of the adaptation process. If we're on a short, tight turnaround, that's where ice becomes, or cold water immersion, particularly in contrast method, can be very useful. And then I also do like to perform PNF stretching with my athletes. More from a perceived soreness perspective, it helps players feel a lot better. And when they're feeling better, it allows them to get back into training and competition faster. The evidence for it is not particularly strong from a recovery perspective, but I mean, subjectively speaking, whether it's placebo or not, if I can get players to feel like they're ready to train again or ready to compete again, then that definitely helps. The other place where, taking a step back to cold water immersion, the other place where that fits in really nicely is on big training days where we might have field or skills-based practice in the morning and we've got a strength and power session in the afternoon. After our field session, that's a really good opportunity for some cold water immersion. That's going to reduce body temperature. It's going to help reduce that perceived soreness. We want to refuel after that with appropriate meal, a little bit of recovery time, just for the food to digest, opportunity for mental refreshment. And then when we get into our strength and power session, on the back of that type of protocol, you tend to find that athletes feel better prepared to produce the outputs that are necessary for a strength session and perform the work with high quality. What do we got here? Cormac has asked, how often do I expose athletes to max velocity in season? In terms of how often I expose them to it, that is going to depend entirely on each individual. In the environments I've worked in recently where we've got good GPS data, we're always able to monitor, like I said before, from a high intensity action standpoint, looking at GPS data, what's normal for this player? How often do they sprint above 85% of top speed each week throughout practice and games? If this player does that 12 times per week normally, or between 10 and 15, for example, and they've only done it 3 times in the last 7 days, then we're probably going to have a session where we look for 3 or 4 exposures and we might actually ask them to do a bit more. Vice versa, if they've got 18 this week already, then our speed session for the week is just going to be some running mechanics, some drilling, get them warm, and they probably don't need to run fast at the back end of that. As a general rule of thumb though, I will look for a max velocity or linear speed day to be in the program at least once per week. In pre-season, we probably have a more structured build of very high speed running volume, and that's where we might have, at the back end of a game simulation on a Saturday, we might have some very high speed running exposures as well. But it's all very individualized based on each individual's training load, their training history, injury history, and what we're trying to achieve in terms of where we're trying to get them for in season. So we'll keep this short and sharp. This will be the last one. Emmett has asked, BFR, when and how can it be used for rehab? Asking more to do with the knee and ankle. So BFR, for anyone who doesn't know, is blood flow restriction training. And blood flow restriction training, essentially what that looks like is using like a sports tourniquet to add some compression around the muscle belly. And then what that compression does is it impacts arterial and venous blood return. So you still get arterial flow coming into the muscle, so blood flow comes into the muscle, but that venous return is limited or trapped. So you get this metabolic buildup of waste metabolites while you're performing exercise, and that creates a really potent stimulus in terms of hypertrophy and muscle retention. And the real benefits of BFR is that you can get this really good stimulus with reduced loading. So the way I see BFR being used the best, knee injuries are a fantastic case study for it, because sometimes we're load compromised with the knee during rehab, and we don't want muscle wastage. We want to retain muscle bulk, particularly through that VMO aspect of the quad. So using the BFR cuffs, we can get a low mechanical strain, but we can still get a good stimulus that's going to retain muscle. It's not the same as traditional strength and power training. It's not my number one method for developing these things, but if you're someone with a tendon-related issue or impact-related loading problems, BFR is a fantastic way to get that muscle warmed up and maintain some of that muscle mass. So the way I would use it is I'd put it on for your warm-up, your general warm-up. I'd leave it on for your warm-up sets on your lower body primary exercise. I'd probably take it off for your main working sets if you're still able to do main working sets. Then I'd probably look to put them back on when you get later into your program and you're starting to do your accessory exercises. So for example, you might find a particular exercise that's a good one for sort of burning out the quad, like a knee extension. You might feel that that's a good exercise to chuck that back on, and you get a real good pump in the quad with that, and you can do it with a lighter load without necessarily straining the joint as much. So thanks for that question, Cormac. Hopefully there's some little gems in there that you can learn from, and give me some feedback if you thought this was a useful way of doing the Q&A. Let me know in the comments section, and chuck any more questions in there, and if people like this, we can do it again. Thanks for watching.